My name is Chris Leventis. I am the head instructor and owner of the Academy of Self-Defense located in Newport Richey, Florida. I am a Sandan, which is a third-degree black belt in the art of Nihon Goshin Aikido under Shihan Stephen Weber and part of the Nihon Goshin Aikido Federation. I often get asked by my students or prospective students about my background. You know, how did you get started in the martial arts? How long have you been training? And like I did with my instructor, everyone likes to hear stories and how you got here, how you did what you did, and how you kept the interest in training all these years. And I think those are valid questions. So risking being a little too self-indulgent, I'd figure in between shooting some of these solo training video series I've been doing, I figured I'd sit down and maybe put some of this down for posterity's sake anyways. My martial arts training started when I was 10, roughly. And I started in the art of Dang Sudo and Hapkido. It was taught jointly at the time under the instructor I had found. And there's a few little stories here in that time I think I'll share with you. I'll try to be as succinct as possible, but it's interesting. It kind of shows how it shaped my thinking and how it got me where I am today, I guess. So anyways, at the time, when I was roughly 7.5, I think it was, I was in Greece with my parents, and we'd go there in the summers when I was younger. And this particular summer, they left me with my uncle for a couple weeks because my parents are going around Greece for business and seeing family, and then they just figured I'd be better off there. And it was in the summertime in Greece, there's these outdoor theaters, and the sun goes down, you would go and watch movies and sit outside, and it was pretty cool. And at the time, for whatever reason, they were playing Bruce Lee movies. They were on loop. I mean, every single one of his movies, every night, played all night. And that's the first time I had seen Bruce Lee in action, and I can tell you, just from the first movie, I was hooked. I would go every night and watch the movies over and over and over. His dynamic personality, his aura, it was just the way he fought. It was like everyone who has seen his movies back in the day, not now. Now, you know, we're inundated with all these movies and special effects. So back then, it was just something out of this world, I guess. So anyways, got back, fast forward a few years later, I was 10, I believe, 10 and a half. I would go to a gym and play basketball with my friends, which was at a school across the street from my neighborhood. And I remember when we'd go in there, there would be occasionally, or 3 or 4 days a week, there would be judo classes, what I would come to know as judo, and Dang Sudo classes. So, and it was in the cafeteria, so you'd have to walk by the cafeteria to go into the gym. So every day we'd go play, and I would, you know, just maybe watch a few minutes of each class. And judo was interesting, but it was a bunch of older guys, and I was young then, so I didn't want to do that. So the Dang Sudo class had a lot of younger kids, and one of them actually was one of my friends from the neighborhood. So it was an easy decision. You know, there was sparring, there was fighting, there were breaking boards. What's not to love, right? So I signed up. Now, I didn't sign up in your usual fashion. Usually you bring your parents in and they sign a permission slip and all that. But my parents really weren't interested in me training in the martial arts. They couldn't understand why. You know, my dad's like, just go play soccer. So long story short, I got the permission slip from this instructor and I forged my mom's name. I know I don't advocate that, but that's the kind of desire I had to train. I couldn't explain it. I can't explain it now. It's just, I needed to do it. So I forged my mom's name. Thankfully, her signature was easy to forge because she really didn't write English very well. It was a very simple signature. I had money saved up from birthdays and Christmas or whatever, working with my dad on the weekends, you know. And so it was $35 a month at the time. It's a bargain now, of course, but I paid for it and I started training. So I got away with it for about 6 months. And what happened was that one particular class, I think it was the class before when we had the test, we had to be there to go through all our forms and make sure we were ready for testing. And class started an hour late. Again, I don't remember why, but it just did. Which meant that it took it past when the sun went down. And usually the rule for me was I can go home after I got home from school, you know, to do homework or eat or whatever, and then go out and play with my friends. And back then it was a different time. No one really, not that they didn't care where you were, but it was normal. We'd go out on our bikes, ride around different neighborhoods, play street hockey, play basketball, do whatever, play in the forest and make tree forts, you know, insert activity here. But it didn't matter. As long as we got home, by the time the street lamps went on, the sun went down. That was kind of the era I grew up in. Anyways, so this particular night, it was hour later, so I guess my mom got worried, got in her car, drove around the neighborhood, different neighborhoods where we'd hang out, and ultimately landed at the middle school. And this was towards the end of class, thankfully. And I remember being out with 2 or 3 other people who were going through our kata, our forms for testing that we had to do. And I remember as I turned, to do a block or whatever it was, part of the form, I would look, and there was my mom. I could see her angry Greek mom face through the pane of the door, which is the only window you could see through. And I just froze for a minute. So I kept going with my kata, sat down, she had walked in, and luckily she didn't grab me by the ear and pull me out, because that's what Greek moms do. She waited till after class and did it and dragged me to the car. That's a different story, but she waited, and of course I caught hell when I went home from my dad and my mom. They forbade me to go back there anymore and train. It was something they didn't want to hear about. Luckily, my brother intervened and kind of convinced them that it was a good thing for me to do, and that's what I like to do, and they let me go back. So, long story short, I tested, and I passed, got my orange belt, and that was that. They allowed me to continue training, which was a good thing, because right around a month or 2 later, they announced they were closing that school. It was an adjunct program through the YMCA, so it was run by a red belt, which is an assistant instructor. And we all moved to the main school in Dunedin, so that's where I finished off my training for the rest of those years. And that training was awesome. I look back at it fondly to this day. It was an old school instructor. He would have a spar before. We'd have to run 1 or 2 miles before class started in our gis to get ready for competition. We did a lot of competitions. I did point fighting and semi-contact, and then ultimately full contact fighting when I got a little older. The class was awesome. We'd do tons of push-ups on our knuckles on the concrete, and punching walls and all that stuff that our body gives up after we get older. We can't do, but when we were younger, we would eat that stuff up. Give us whatever you want. It was great. It was awesome training. And I'm glad I did it, because it really instilled a foundational discipline into me, if you will. Fast forward years later, when I found Mr. Weber, that discipline was already there. So all I had to do was continue on with it. So I'm thankful for that period of my life, for sure. I had to, there was a period about 4 years where I stopped training. My instructor at the time closed the school, and he moved to Korea to pursue his training. So I could definitely understand that. At the time as a kid, I didn't get it. We felt abandoned. And I was left wandering around different Taekwondo schools in the area. And Taekwondo is similar to Dang Sudo, but it didn't have Hapkido, and it just wasn't the same. After you're used to a certain instructor and the way they do things and the family that we had there, it was hard to continue. But I bounced around 2 or 3 different schools and ultimately quit. And at the time, I took up weightlifting, and I was, obviously a young teenager. I wanted to get buff and muscles and all that good stuff. So I started working out with my best friend, who ultimately ended up being my brother-in-law. And we'd work out, go eat 4 or 5 cheeseburgers, fries. It didn't matter. We just had to get the calories in. We were young. It didn't matter at the time. Just ate what you could and worked out. That's what we did. But what happened at one point was I was lifting too much weight, and I tore my pec muscle. So that meant I couldn't really work out anymore for a while. The workout stopped, the eating continued. So I ended up gaining about 35, 40 pounds. It was right around this time that I kind of rediscovered my passion for martial arts. And it was a roundabout way, but it has significance, because it was watching a Brandon Lee movie. So watching Bruce Lee got me interested in the martial arts, kind of introduced me to what they were and what was capable. And his son, through his movies, and at the time I think it was Rapid Fire, got me reinterested, relit that fire inside of me to go back and train. And when I was sitting in the theater, I remember remembering a sign that I used to drive by all the time. It was on a road called Grand Boulevard, which ironically is not too far around the corner from my school right now. And I remember seeing a sign for Aikido, and I always wanted to try Japanese arts, so I'm like, okay, one day I'll stop in. Well, one day I did. Walked up those stairs, which I found myself walking up and down many times years after, and met Mr. Weber. And I guess the rest is history. He, like all the people he's taught, had a profound influence on me, which I'll talk about in the next video. But that's kind of my early days of the martial arts, and there's a lot of stories inside of that, of course, which I won't bore you with, but that's kind of how I got started in the martial arts.